The CAPS curriculum, South Africa's curriculum, is a very prescriptive curriculum, and it's a very content-based curriculum. And I often get teachers contacting me saying, please help. This is the scenario, what do we do? And often there are no correct answers or incorrect answers. But I find the same scenarios come up over and over again. So I'm going to go through the 5 common scenarios that I often hear, and teachers saying, what do I do? And once we've been through each of those 5 scenarios, we're going to look at what do we do in those cases. And the first is where you've got a group of learners, or maybe just one learner, who is struggling to grasp a certain amount of content. It's important content, it's necessary content, but you can't spend any more time on it because the annual teaching plan says you need to now move to the next section. What do we do? A fairly similar scenario, yet this time with skills. So the previous one was learners don't have the content. This time learners don't have the skills that are necessary to move on. Yet you're sitting with an annual teaching plan that says you now have to move to the next section of work. What do you do? And we find this often in languages where you've got 3 or 4 key skills that you want the learners to grasp, yet the themes are what runs every 2 weeks. So let me give you an example. You've got in language, you've got listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And the theme this week is famous sportsmen. So we see teachers do the listening, they do the speaking, they do the reading, but then there's no time to do the writing. So what do? They move on because the annual teaching plan says they must. And they get to the next theme, which is maybe famous people, and they start again with the listening, speaking, reading, and then they get to the writing, but they don't have time. So what you find there is they are moving on because of the annual teaching plan, yet the learners don't have the skills, particularly in writing, because that's the last one we deal with. The next scenario is that you've got a very important section. You feel it's incredibly important, but it's not in the curriculum. I've had a lot of maths teachers say to me, but we don't teach this and the learners need this to move on. Or in language skills. Sometimes we get in the high school when we're talking about particular subjects, like for example, economics or sciences, where a certain section that you feel is important is actually not in the curriculum. What do we do? The next scenario has to do with assessment, and I get a lot of questions about assessment often. Assessment, first of all, there is too much assessment in many of the grades and in many of the subjects. But I find that teachers, so the annual teaching plan tells you exactly when you should assess. And in some subjects, it's more prescriptive than in others. And I find that teachers often say to me, I haven't completed the work yet. I can't give this assessment to the learners. Yet the annual teaching plan says it must. Or you might have a scenario where the school has already sent out, which they meant to do at the beginning of the term, to tell the parents when their formal assessments are going to take place. And you've sent this out, yet you suddenly realize you're not ready. You have not completed the work that the learners need to do for that formal assessment. What do you do in a case like that? And then the 5th scenario is one that I hear often from grade R teachers right up to matric teachers. There's just not enough time. You realize at whatever time during the term or the year, you're not going to complete the curriculum. And you've got to make some decisions. What are you going to do? So now for all of these scenarios, although they are different, they all have the same solution. And it's not really the answer, it's just guidelines. And it's important for us to remember that as teachers, we need to use our professional judgment. Now this word gets thrown around a lot. But at the end of the day, you as the teacher know what's best for those learners, or should know what's best for those learners. And whatever decision you make must be made in the best interests of the learner, best education interests of the learner, even more so. So often you're going to be forced to make a judgment call. Looking at the situation, you say, right, what am I going to do? And there are two questions you can ask yourself. The first is, what is going to be best for the learners? So let's say you're sitting in a foundation phase class and there are certain skills, key math skills that these learners need to know. Is it in the best interests of the learners to just leave them and move on? Is it in the best interests of the learners to make sure that they grasp these concepts and these skills rather than worrying about all the content? In a case like that, it is definitely best for the learners to get the skills and the content. And then the other question, which is even more important, is to ask ourselves, what skills do these learners need to progress to the next concept or next grade. And here, this is very essential in subjects that build on each other from year to year. So, for example, maths. If a learner hasn't grasped the key skills in grade 4, they're going to struggle in grade 5. Languages is the same. So it's less of an issue in your content subjects, but even in content subjects, there are lots of skills. Geography, for example, map work skills, those basic skills, if they don't have them at a young age, they're going to struggle later. So make sure that you ask yourself these two questions. And just 2 guidelines. The first is always skills over content. Skills is what we teach the learners. The content is the vehicle that we use to teach those skills. And often you'll be faced with the dilemma of quality versus quantity. And quality should always come first. It's not about how much they learn, it's about how well they learn something.